What's going on, you guys? I just wanted to hop on here and make this video. I was on the phone with a client of mine yesterday. We were chatting about fitness goals, and what my question to my client was, hey, how have things been going? And their response was, like, things are going pretty good. There's a little more progress I want to make, but overall headed in the right direction. And so I say, hey, where do you want to be ultimately? And my client pretty much said, like, hey, like, I want to be here, and this is where I'm at now. And I go, okay, well, why are you not where you want to be? And I just let him talk. And then he goes on to tell me, like, hey, I'm having trouble with this, and this is my hurdle. So I say, okay, like, let's not worry about what you're doing right, although it kind of sounds counterintuitive. Let's focus on what you're doing wrong. Like, what's the most important thing that's really holding you back? Because, like, the other elements you have down, right? Like, your nutrition is pretty spot on, and the training is pretty spot on. What is it that's in that middle spot where you're like, I can't get over this? Because once you overcome that hurdle, now okay, this is how I get over and through that hurdle. This is how I continue accomplishing my goals. But if we go a week, 2 weeks, and you're like, there's things going on, but I'm not gonna communicate with you, like, it's tough for me to be able to help, right? So the more that you communicate with somebody, the more that you can find answers to your problems. And if you don't have the solutions you want yet, then you need to follow a structured plan and some sort of guidelines. And getting to where you want to be, you can get pretty close with just kind of having some general rules of thumb in your mind. But eventually you want to write these things down, have a step-by-step layout of, okay, like, this is step A through Z, and I just need to follow this. And it's as simple as just figuring out what that plan is. Because if you don't have skills or knowledge, or if you feel some sort of like anxiousness around whatever you're trying to do, it's literally just the fact that you don't have the skills to implement those daily habits, or you don't know what those habits are. And so if you have the habits, you can develop the skills to then apply to getting to where you want to be. And if you don't have those skills just yet, you can practice them. But it starts with one, knowing where that destination is, because you don't know what the roadmap looks like if you don't know where your end goal is. And I think a lot of people are like, oh, I just want to get stronger, I just want to lose weight. Yeah, that's great and all, and whatnot, and it's great to have those general goals, but, like, how are you going to lose weight week over week for 12 weeks if you just want to lose weight? You might lose a pound 1 week and then the next 11 weeks not lose any, right? Because, I just achieved my goal. But if you break it down, like, okay, let me specify this, like, make it a SMART goal, right? Something that I can measure, something that has a specific length, something that is attainable, something that I can have an action plan and step by step process towards. When you can put in that realm of, like, okay, I want to lose 10 pounds in 12 weeks. Think about how simple that makes it. You need to lose literally not even a pound a week to hit that goal. And now when you start to incorporate these habits and realize, like, hey, like, I'm making a lot more progress at a faster rate, you'll notice, hey, maybe I want to lose 20 pounds in 12 weeks, and maybe you're 6 pounds down by the third week and you change that goal, right? If you have a clear designated, this is where I want to go, it makes it that much easier getting to where you want to be, because one, you know the steps, and now you're working on developing the skills and improving the skills to get there. But number two is, like, you actually know where to start, and right, versus just being in this standstill stuck spot where you're like, I don't know what to do, I have these issues and these problems, but, like, I don't know a solution. You now have a layout of, like, I just need to start with step one, and then step two, and then eventually you get to a point where you're like, hey, like, I just achieved my goal. And what I think really, really hits the spot, not with just myself, but with my clients and everybody I've worked with, over 60 people that I've helped, change with their fitness and nutrition and their just overall mentality and perception on life. I think, like, most importantly, what I found is, yeah, they're happy when they lose 20 pounds at the end of 12 weeks. But you know what they're typically most happy about, and that really brings me, like, a good feeling, is me asking them, like, hey, like, how did you do it, right? Like, and then they tell me, like, oh, I just had to keep pushing, like, I just had to follow the plan. And then I ask them, like, how do you feel now that you are where you want to be? like, oh, it's cool, and they always tell me the same thing at the end. Oh, it's great, I'm feeling good, blah 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 blah, but I'm excited to see where I can go next. And that just goes to show that it's in the middle space where you're learning and growing and expanding. Like when you are stuck still, bro, you're contracting, you're not doing much, you're just there. But when you're actively learning, progressing, setting these clear goals, failing, because it's normal and it happens, you get further and further along. And then after 12 weeks, not only are we down 20 pounds, for example, but now we also have the mental fortitude, and we've broken these barriers, knowing like, hey bro, we just lost 20 pounds in 12 weeks, and that was like our first time really investing into this and committing to ourselves. Like, what could we do in 3 months? What could we do in 6 months, right? Like, and then you just now start to just will these things into existence, and you have the strength, both mentally and physically, but you also have the nice thing about picking up these habits is your body starts to just get a lot easier and more efficient with performing these daily tasks. You get into a flow state. It's momentum that picks up, confidence starts to roll, and now, bro, this steady steam of just ease and success is far easier getting to than if you're inconsistent with it. And so that's something I always ask my clients is like, hey, like, how do you feel? How do we get here? Even though I know, right? I want you to tell me why, because I want you to know so that when we run into issues in the future or when we want to take another step, okay, you already know what you need to do. Now start applying that, plus maybe a little bit more, right? But I think a lot of people get caught up in this, like, I don't even want to get started. I don't even want to look at the goal because I'm scared. But like, bro, the first thing is just facing that. Like, what is the number? Like, it could be as simple as I want to lose 3 pounds in the next 2 weeks. Think about how easy of a goal that is. You can knock that out of the ballpark without a question. And then that just instills that confidence and that habit, and that makes you want to do it again and again and again. And repetition, right? Repetition is really the name of the game. Like, I've been exercising for over 10 years, 12 years really. And like, if I were to say like, oh, I'm going to do this for a year and then not do it for the rest of my life, like, that would have not gotten me much, because I would have just failed to gotten to a certain point and then just been stuck there and regressed. But because I decided I want this to be a long-term approach, and I want to look at my long-term health, prioritize these things, make sure that like family members of mine that have sicknesses, disease, like, I don't run into those issues, and also that I can give them the guidance and help they need, right? Yeah, so I think really where that gold mine in a sense is not the end result and not the starting point, but the skills you develop and the individual you become within that process. So like, if you've ever watched a sport, for example, right, and you watch a specific player win a championship, right, and then maybe they get traded or they lose some of their other key players the following season, and then you see either that player like really perform and play to his best, or win again, right, or something along those lines. You see like, hey, it wasn't just the environment he was in, it was that individual. Like, he forced his way in there, and like he learned the skills, he learned what he had to do and what was necessary to get to, like, winning another championship in the sports example. But now he can continue doing this. And it's the same thing when it comes to like your finances, right? Like, you cannot earn 10% higher or less than your perceived level of income. So that means that, like, okay, if you think you're only worth $100,000, you're not going to make more than $110,000, and that's just how it is, right? And if you think you're only worth 100 grand, you're going to make a minimum of 90K, right? And it's all perception and mentality. And when you start to think that, especially with fitness, like start to tell yourself, like, fitness comes easy to me, like, I lose weight easily. Like, these things are just reprogramming your subconscious mind to realize that, like, number one, I have all the steps I need, and two, I'm making it easier on myself mentally. So it's not really difficult, it's not really this chore anymore, it's just this thing that I do for this end result. And then you start to pair the end result and how you're going to feel, how you're going to look, but also like the skills you're going to develop, and you start to pair that with the actual hard, quote unquote, hard, difficult tasks it takes to get there. And you start to correlate the two, and those hard, quote unquote, difficult tasks start to become enjoyment filled, right? And you now are attracted to these things. You can't wait to get up and go to the gym. You can't wait to eat healthy. And it seems weird, but like, you don't understand what that feeling is like until you're there, because ultimately what it is, like, you're putting your future self first and your future vision first rather than short-term satisfaction. And some of these things are uncomfortable in the short term, but after doing them 2 or 3 weeks, they become easy, right? And so one more question that I always ask my clients, especially if it's somebody that I'm working on with nutrition, which all of my clients I work with on nutrition, actually with the exception of one, but majority of my clients, I'm working with them on nutrition, and I always ask them one question, and I've gotten the exact same response from every single one of my clients. Is like, hey, so do you remember when we first started a couple months back, and you had to get a sense of where the nutrition was, follow these specific habits that I have you follow to keep your nutrition dialed in and your workouts. Like, how difficult was that at the beginning? And I asked because I remember them saying like, oh, I don't know if I can stick with this and whatnot. And there were a couple of weeks, maybe they're inconsistent, but I asked them, for example, I asked this client yesterday. I've been working with this client for maybe 4 months now, and I go, remember at the beginning when you had to start doing these things, these daily tasks, tracking nutrition, that sort of thing, like, remember how difficult that was? He was like, yeah. I was like, well, how would you say it was now that you're in the habit and it's routine for you? Is it easier, or is it something you have to constantly think about? He was like, no, it's just second nature. And I'm like, that's the main purpose, is like, the habits are going to instill change, right? Like, when you start habits, you're essentially just driving awareness to the problems around, right? So if, for example, you want to prioritize your nutrition, having habits of eating specific ways from a psychological perspective in your brain, it really is telling your brain, like, here are the things we need, right? And when you start to just do these repetitively, they become routine, and now it's so much easier, and it's almost more difficult to stop doing the habit and take backward steps. Like, it's more mentally challenging because now your brain's adjusted and accustomed to this. It's more difficult to take that step backwards and stop doing these things. You might as well just continue doing it, bro, because it's so much easier. And now that you're in a good spot, right? Now that these things are easier for you, I go, now is really the time to emphasize that, right? I'm like, hey, now is the time where you can take steps backwards, which I wouldn't recommend, or you can continue taking steps upward, but you're going to make way more progress at the current state you're at now, because your metabolism is optimized, your body is primed for performance, and you have these habits down. And now it's just a matter of just changing things slightly and just continuing with the plan. And the feedback I get is like, it's so much easier now that I started, and it's almost hard to go back to the way it was. And why would you now go back to hard, right? And now, even in that sense, you're now associating the hard and the difficult with the bad, meaning like, oh, me being out of shape, me not being lean, me not having six-pack abs, like, that is bad, right? And now you're really shifting the perception around what is good and bad, and now you're making it far easier on your brain to want to engage in healthy, positive habits that are going to develop you as a human and improve your character. And now you're actually turning away habits that are not helpful and ones that aren't negative, maybe aren't getting you the results you want, or aren't good for you. Those habits, you end up not wanting to do them, and eventually you overcrowd those bad habits with the good habits. And so if you can focus on the small steps and just focus on those small daily actions and stack from it, then you look back and you're like, wow, look at the individual I've become. Like, bro, I'm literally sitting out here, bro, and like, the main reason I've been able to get into great shape, stay in great shape, continue working for that, and also help so many people with their fitness is because I've simply just lived my life for the past 10-12 years by a couple different rules. One of which is just, let's try to get in protein. One of which is just try to not eat a ton of junk food. And then one of which is just exercise a lot. Like, those things are so easy to do. And I know earlier in the story I said have a clear-cut goal. And you do want to have a clear-cut goal in the short term. But if you want to have a long-term goal, you need these more generalized ways of living. And that makes it easy, because when you're on vacation, or you're camping, or you're out of the club, right? I mean, it's tough, I guess, the club, but it's far easier to try to avoid sugar or to try to eat a little bit more protein than try to make sure, your protein target is on point for that one day. But rather than, taking your foot entirely off the gas, you're still easing in a little bit, you're still accelerating, just not at the same rate. But it's good to have those rules, because now you know, like, rather than me traveling and just blowing steam and, you know, losing the progress or losing those habits I've instilled, I'm just maintaining them. And maybe I'm not perfect this week, but I'm still going to make great progress and stay in great shape while I'm enjoying myself. And then next week you just get back into it, and now you have this more lifelong approach where you can go 2, 3, 4 weeks where you're really locked in your fitness, and then maybe you go a couple weeks where you take a couple steps back and you're not doing everything you want, but you're still slowly getting better. Maybe not making these huge jumps, but you're still progressing. And the progression ultimately is what leads to that long-term momentum, confidence, and habit stacking. So if you can have that long-term approach, and then underneath that, if you can also have these short-term goals and make them reasonable on yourself but also challenging, that will get you to where you want to be. And so I think it helps having a short and a long-term goal, right? Just like with a car, you know, like you're on the highway, you want to have that short-term vision of, I want to make sure I don't hit the car in front of me, I want to have enough space between, but also, you know, like, I'm extremely far from my destination. So when you have a mix of both, you're able to focus on both. And so it's okay, I have this long-term vision of, I need to make sure that I'm on the road, and I'm not overthinking about the small details of the road. I'm paying attention to the big picture, driving safely and getting to my destination. But at the same time, knowing that, like, hey, if I'm on the highway and I'm doing a better job, you know, with not you know, not staying, not swerving out of my lane, those sorts of things, the long-term vision gets a lot easier, right? And you get there a lot quicker, a lot safer, a lot less stress. Same thing with fitness, right? So if you have these long-term goals, have those long-term goals with those generalized rules that you abide and live your life by to the best of your ability. But at the same time, having those small goals where it's like, you know, these things are almost milestones that allow me to remember that I'm on a long-term goal. And the more that I stick with these short-term goals and specify what it is I'm doing and where I'm trying to go, then that progress just starts to come to you. You just start to attract that, and now your life is just different. And not just is your life different, but you are different as a person, because you've overcome so many limiting beliefs and allowed yourself to really just start to open up the first page of the book titled Yourself 2.0, right? Like, you're just getting a little bit closer to where you want to be. And you do that every day for a year, or for 2 years, or for 5 years, or for 10 or 20. And after 20 years, you look back and you are right where you wanted to be all along. But the nice thing is, you didn't waste those 10, 20 years stressing and thinking about getting to the end goal. You spent those 10 or 20 years embracing every day, every moment, enjoying the pain, enjoying the struggle, enjoying the gratitude, enjoying the fulfilling feelings that come with overcoming goals and overcoming hurdles and failing and not getting to where you want to be, but then getting a setback and then working harder or working with a different approach to get there. And now you are like, wow, I just achieved that goal, but the whole time I was aware of where I was, and I was grateful and experienced that whole journey, that whole process. And like, you know, like, when you do that, it just makes it so much easier. But also it makes it just like, hey, you know, this is just part of who you are. This is just your life. You know, like, it doesn't have to be hard. It doesn't have to be difficult. If you want to lose weight, that task can be very fun. Like, bad habits can be just as addicting as good habits can, and vice versa. So if you have a bad habit of watching TV, or you have a bad habit of not exercising, imagine if the habit of exercising, or the habit of eating healthy, or the habit of losing weight, or whatever, imagine if that was just as exciting, if not way more exciting, than actually watching TV. And that is what will happen when you start to shift your perception around these habits and short versus long-term goals. And so I hope that helps some of you guys. But definitely just start with some small steps, because if you can't continue with this habit for the rest of your life, then I personally believe there's no point of starting at all. because unless you're trying to get somewhere just short term, what's the point of starting a habit now if in 6 months you're not doing the habit anymore? You might as well, in my opinion, start with a smaller habit that you're still doing 5-10 years from now. That could be as simple as aiming for a little bit more protein throughout the day. It could be as simple as working out a couple times a week. But now you just have these things that stack, and then eventually that 3 days a week in the gym goes to 4, or that, you know, enough protein turns to 100 grams, and now you have more detailed numbers. But like, without looking at where you want to go and what steps are required, you're never going to get there. You need an action plan, and you need to figure out, you know, like a map. Like, okay, this is where I want to go, this is where I'm at now, which route do I take? And then you just start taking one of them, and all those routes are going to get you closer. Some of them faster than others, but you're moving in that direction, and that's most important. And that builds the confidence, everything you need, and you just continue from there. So start with the easiest step. Start with the step that you can do without making it super challenging. And then just start to notice how you feel from that habit, how you perform, like how you feel after, how you feel with exercise or better food, whatever. Start to see how you feel from that and go from there. And then maybe you make another small step, and maybe that's even easier because now you're used to doing these things, right? Or maybe it's difficult, but you get used to it after a few weeks, and now it's easy, right? All of these things are things you can learn and things you can apply. And so if you aren't where you want to be, it's just that you don't know where you want to go. Like, you don't have a vision of where you want to be, and that's as simple as like just decide, like, what do you want? And that's the first option, the first reason that you're not going to get to where you want to be. The second reason is, you know, you're just not taking the action steps. And so if you know where you want to go, you just take the steps. It doesn't matter if they're good or bad, or if the forms on exercise is perfect or whatnot, or if the macros on the meal are perfect. It's like you're taking the step and you're getting closer. And ultimately, yeah, like, maybe you're not going to get to where you want to right away, but like, it will take time. And the more that you practice these steps, the easier it is. And the more you practice something, the more repetition it becomes, and then it just starts to evolve and become, you know, part of who you are. And now you don't have to worry about doing this, that, and third. It's just part of your lifestyle. And you're reaping the rewards, but also not just the physical rewards, but like the mental benefits of like, wow, I just really overcame that. What else can I do, right? Like, what else can I set as a goal and achieve? And like, what other, you know, things do I want to accomplish in my life? Because I've just done this, the hardest one, fitness, right? Like, I have to mentally and physically will my way. Everything else is usually just mental or physical. Like, this is both. It's mental and it's physical. You just overcome that. You just overcame that. Like, of course you can do anything else. It's just a plan, and it might not be easier or harder than things you've done in the past, but, you know, like, learning how to get to where you want to be when it comes to your fitness, your exercises, that just will start to seep over into other avenues of your life, and that should really help you, you know, elevate your life and take your goals and where you want to be to the next level. So start by taking the first step, and once you take the first step, the second step is the next one that follows. But you can't ever get to the second step if you don't take the first. And if you want to take the first step, you need to know where you're going. So figure out where you're going. Like, decide, like, who is it that I want to become, and what do I want to achieve, and then how do I get there? And then you just follow the steps. And if you find that the steps are confusing, you don't know what they are, understand that those steps are broken down into actions, and you figure out what those actions are. And people that practice those actions repetitively end up developing those skills. And then now, by acquiring and owning, possessing those skills, they apply those skills to their goal, and they achieve their desired outcome. So just know that it's all literally just a formula. You just need to figure out if you want to play the game or if you want to just watch on the sidelines.